Good evening, everyone, and good evening to the members of the public in the audience. Welcome to our planning meeting this evening. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Johnson, who is being substituted by Councillor Hensman. We've just heard that Councillor Wrench is feeling quite unwell, so he hasn't arranged a substitute because he's only been taken ill in the last half an hour. So I have no other. Councillor Mrs. Beaver's not here yet, but I presume she's on her way. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct from members? Members, I will do a joint declaration on behalf of us all on 5G, application 22020076HH, as the agent is related to a member of the council who we all know. I will also do a joint declaration on all of those that know Mr. Hobbs. I think many of us know Mr. Hobbs. In addition to that, I would like to add on my NPI on that Mr. Hobbs did contact me only to ask when this was coming to the planning committee. We did not discuss the application in any way whatsoever, so I shall remain and vote. Does anyone else wish to add any other declarations of interest? Councillor Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to declare an NPI in item 5F, application 22015527 FUL, Braintree District Council. I'm aware that Braintree District Council owns some land connected to this application, and as the Cabinet member responsible for assets, I will leave the meeting at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor Mrs. Spray, I think I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity then, I'll declare an NPI on 5C, land at the airfield Earlscone as well. I also had a couple of conversations with Malcolm Hobbs about the application, but purely on timing, progress and so on.
Same as me.
Yeah.
Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, as Councillor Spray, I've had a conversation with Malcolm Hobbs on application, 5C, and to discuss the timing of that. So I shall stay and vote. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. And that brings us to the end of item 2. Item 3, the minutes. I have the minutes of the 23rd of August and the 4th of October to sign. I will take them individually. Does anyone wish to make any comments on the August the 23rd minutes? If not, would someone like to move them as being a correct record? Thank you. Does it find a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour, I sign the 23rd of August as a true record. Thank you very much indeed. Then I have the minutes of the 4th of October. Does anyone wish to make any comments? If not, does someone like to move them as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Wilson. Councillor Swear, thank you. All those in favour that I sign the 4th of October minutes as a true record? Thank you. That brings us on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions on planning matters this evening. Those wishing to make a statement prior to each application as we proceed with it. So we come on to item 5, planning applications. The first application is 5A, application 19000014 full, land at junction of Laburnham Way and Dorothy Sayers Drive, Whittam. This can be found on pages 6 to 80. We have no speakers on this application, so we'll go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Neil. Good evening, and thank you, Neil.
Good evening, members. I'll just share the screen. So this is one of 2 applications on the agenda tonight, which have previously been considered by the committee. We're given resolutions to grant subject to completion of Section 106 agreement. The purpose of the report for this and the following item is to update members on these applications, because since the original resolutions were granted, the local plan has been adopted, and that's obviously a material consideration in terms of the determination of the application. So as a result, we're reporting this application and the following one back to members for reconsideration, with a recommendation that fresh resolutions to grant subject to 106 are provided. So this application is for the redevelopment of the Rickstones Neighbourhood Centre. So it's a mixed-use redevelopment that's proposed. So a mix of commercial units, as you can see, and 21 flats, along with landscaped areas, amenity areas, gardens, car parking and associated infrastructure. So this is on land at the junction of Laburnum Way and Dorothy Sayers Drive in Witham. So this is the application site at the moment. So as you can see on here, there's two buildings within the red line of the application site. So a northern building and an eastern building. There's a hard landscape area in the middle. Just in terms of bearings, this is a car park for the adjoining recreation ground down here, with a play area next to it. There's a pavilion building which is owned by the District Council here, which is used currently in connection with the playing fields. There's a public house just outside, but adjacent to the public house here. There's an existing car park here. And as you can see, there's an existing vehicular access into the site. So in a little bit more detail, you can just see here existing site, so existing car parking area on the two buildings. On the ground floor, there are commercial premises on both the buildings and then flats above. So that's the existing. And then this is the proposed redevelopment of the site. So again, just in terms of bearings, this is the pavilion building and the public house, and this is the application site. So existing access arrangements retained, new car parking area, new formal car parking area provided, and two new buildings. So it reads as one building, but actually could be developed as two. So you've got one building here, another down here. Garden areas at the back. This is outside the site, so this is a public area around the back here. I'll just move on through. So that's a slightly different location plan, but you can see the buildings more clearly. So these are the commercial units on the ground floor in this building here, and there'll be flats above. And then this is purely a residential building down this side here. So on the first floor, as you can see here, this is flats, and then there is a second floor to the building. So we've got a three-storey building, second floor flats above, 21 flats in total. 7 flats are on site at the moment, so it's an increase of 14 on what is at the moment. Included within the presentation some images to show representations of the buildings. So these are 3GI images produced by the applicant. I've included these rather than the elevations because I think members found these more useful at the previous committee to give a representation of what the building's appearance will be. So this is looking at the car park back towards the building. This is looking from the rear in that public area that I showed you. So these are the backs of the flats looking out over the recreation ground. They've got a private amenity area or shared amenity area behind this means of enclosure here. This is a view again from the car park. So this is just showing an outline of the adjoining public house. So the walkway that currently runs between the commercial unit and the pub will be retained. So it just shows that image there. And then I've included this image. So I haven't included the full set of site photos from before because I think everybody will be familiar with the site. But Councillor Abbott did raise this with us when we put it on the agenda to be reported back. So I believe it was raised by local residents regards to this concrete mural, which is on one of the existing buildings within the development, and there was some local interest in having that retained. Following Councillor Abbott's contacting us, we contacted the agent to ask whether it would be possible to retain the mural and incorporate it into the new development, and the agent has confirmed the applicant is willing to do that. So we are proposing an additional condition to cover that. So obviously we need to make sure that we've got something agreed before there's any site clearance or demolition happens. But we're looking for a scheme which will set out how the murals to be retained and then relocated within the development. And then obviously that the development is carried out in accordance with that approved scheme. So that's an additional condition that we are asking members to approve. So, in summary, as we've set out in the committee report, there were some harms identified when this was originally reported to the Planning Committee. However, the adverse impacts weren't considered to outweigh the considerable benefits which were highlighted within the report. And as such, we concluded that the application should be recommended for approval. It's worth just reiterating that in terms of the adverse impacts, one of those was that there was some conflict with the Rickstones Neighbourhood Centre supplementary planning document, which the council has adopted and obviously provides planning guidance in terms of the redevelopment. So this scheme is not wholly in accordance with the SPD. However, we do think it's in general accordance with the spirit of it, and it was recommended for approval on that basis. We've set out in the committee report that there are no significant conflicts which arise from the adoption of a new local plan. Most of the policies carry over, and where there are new policies, as we've set out in the report, actually apply. So in terms of things like nationally described space standards and those types of things, the development as it was originally accorded, so that presents us no problem. The reason for reporting this back is the Section 106 agreement did take longer than we'd anticipated or had hoped to complete. That was partly due to delays getting the agreement from the County Council, who are a party to the agreement. I would pass on the applicants' displeasure at the delay. They're very keen to get on, so I think it's only fair to point out that they're keen to be getting on, and they weren't the main reason that this took so long to complete. But the 106 is now completed, so what we are asking tonight is just a fresh resolution that members are still happy that we grant, subject to the original conditions and that one additional one tonight, subject to the Section 106 being completed. That is signed, so that can be done soon. So hopefully we can see the site being redeveloped in the not too distant future. If anybody's got any questions, obviously I'd be more than happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we had a very full discussion of this very item earlier in the year, and we resolved to grant planning permission. We regret the delay in the processing required for the S106 agreement. Beyond our control, but we do apologise for it. As there's been no material changes, I see no real reason for further discussion, so move officer's recommendation with the additional condition.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does it find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I second the motion to approve this application. I'll only briefly reiterate that I think it is a bit of a missed opportunity because Whittam North Wall and Riven Hall, which are growing very rapidly, do not have a doctor's surgery. And as part of a comprehensive redevelopment, it would have been nice to at least seen some attempt to deliver that on this site, which was an opportunity, but I know that's water under the bridge for this site, but it remains a need in Whittam and Riven Hall. Anyone who's familiar with the site knows that it's got very run down, and I can remember it when it hadn't been built that long, a long time ago, in the late 1960s. It was part of the development of that area, which was farmland prior to that, but time has not been very kind on it. All that said, I know that the people who contacted me about the mural, which was a local historian and also I think they're called the 20th Century Society or the 20th Century Group, will be very pleased that officers have managed to secure that the mural's saved. I can't say it's sort of art that personally I would jump over hoops for, but it has an importance and they think it's worth saving. So extremely pleased that officers have managed to secure that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to add anything new or further? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the additional condition regarding the mural. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Now we now move on to application 5B, application 210059 VAR Morrison Supermarket, Braintree Road, Whittam. We do have speakers on this application. It can be found on pages 81 to 149. The first person that wishes to make a statement is Mr. Richard Tuck. He is an objector and he is present with us this evening. Mr. Tuck, would you like to make your statement? And I just remind you have 3 minutes. Yes, please. Thank you.
Good evening, folks, members.
Evening.
My name is Richard Tuck. I'm here today to represent the residents of Albert Road and myself, the owner-operator of the commuter car parking business that will be directly affected by the removal of the Morrison's wall. My family have run this business, which facilitates nearly 400 vehicles for the railway station for 27 years, and up until the pandemic was very successful, achieving nearly 100% capacity. Unfortunately, the COVID lockdowns have all but destroyed us, as unlike the council car parks and NCP, we were forced to close our gates and receive no support such as furlough grants, rate exceptions, etc. Consequently, we have not made a profit in over 2.5 years. Prior to the pandemic, the only problem we had was of traffic congestion caused by our customers along Albert Road. It is unfortunate the Highways Department have not consulted myself or the residents, as we could have enlightened them as to past problems. In the mornings between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m, the north end of Albert Road, where it begins, would periodically become completely blocked by my customers queuing to enter the car park, thus making it difficult for residents to leave their driveways, buses to pass, and vehicles dropping off passengers at the station entrance. In the evening, the problem would move on to the other end of the road, near the station entrance, where it meets the B1018. Between 5:30 and 7:30 p.m, my customers would cause congestion and blockages as they leave Albert Road to the B1018. This will cause difficulties for residents at this end of the road and anyone looking to access the railway station entrance, and again slow down buses. It was also discovered by our research and by consulting Richard Plant, the author of the, excuse me, a bit of a mouthful, the Braintree District Council Parking Strategy Review, that most of our customers head north via the Braintree Road. These problems are non-existent at the moment, as we've been running at about 15% of capacity. However, we cannot run a business at a loss indefinitely. So in the new year, we plan to introduce new measures in a last-ditch attempt to increase our customer numbers. At this point, one of two things will happen. Either we are successful, which will result in the same congestion problems arising, or we are not, which will result in the car park closing for good and sold for development, thus reducing the car parking capacity for the community's railway station by about 40%. I strongly believe the removal of the wall to allow traffic directly into the car park would help our business enough to keep going, whilst improving the lives of residents along Albert Road. All we are asking is for the committee to uphold its original decision, which all parties, including the Highways Department and Morrison's, were happy with. Thank you for listening to my statement.
Thank you, Mr. Tuck. Thank you very much for your statement. The next person is joining us by virtually, and it is Mr. Adam Bradley. He is the agent. I don't know if we're going to be able to make contact. We couldn't earlier, have we?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Bradley sent me a message to say he can't hear the meeting, so I will read his statement on his behalf.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Alison.
This is a statement by Mr. Adam Bradley. Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. My name is Adam Bradley and I am a Principal Engineer at Brian G. Hall Transport Consultants. We continue to act on behalf of Morrison's in relation to the proposed highway works at their store in Witham. You may recall that Stuart Wilkins, who is a director at Brian G. Hall, spoke at the original committee meeting held on 31st of May 2022, whereby it was resolved to grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement. As set out in the sound and compelling officer's report, all aspects of the proposals continue to be fully supported by the local planning authority and Essex County Council Highways Department, who we have liaised with extensively to formulate and agree the final scheme presented to you this evening. All aspects of the proposals are fully supported by your officers, along with the officers of the Highway Authority at Essex County Council. On behalf of Morrison's, as applicant, I respectfully recommend to you the recommendation for the grant of planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement and would ask you to confirm your support for the scheme. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you this evening and thank you for listening. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison, for reading that. That brings us to the end of our statements on that application. So we go to the presentation, which is going to also be presented by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the second application that I referred to. So this application, unlike the first one, this is a variation condition. So this is seeking to vary a condition, but one that's previously been considered by the committee. So the condition in question here is with regards to the two conditions. So it's condition 11, which was trading restrictions. So in essence, what the situation was here, following the appeal decision, so when the planning inspector originally granted the planning permission to extend the Morrison store in Witham, she added a condition which required the demolition of the wall between the spur road, which comes off the Morrison's access roundabout, and Cutthroat Lane. That hasn't been done. Obviously, the extension is open. What's happened is the applicant, Morrison's, has made an application to vary the condition following extensive discussions with the Highway Authority, and what's proposed here is a variation of the condition. So just in terms of where we're looking at, so this is the area in question down here, the wall in question. So obviously we've got the original supermarket here, which has now been extended with its car park wrapping around two sides. There's a petrol filling station over here with the supermarket. There's a block of flats here on the corner. This is the main road coming through. So this is the roundabout, which members will be familiar with as they drive through Witham. So at the moment, you can come in and out of the car park to Witham here. There's a roundabout here. So the traffic for the shop carries on round this way and into the car park. And there's a dead stub here coming off the roundabout with a wall that terminates the road here. This is Cutthroat Lane, which runs along the edge of the Morrison site here. This land here is Mr. Tuck's car park that you heard about. And then running round the outside, this is the Braintree branch line, the railway line coming off the main line here. Witham Station's just a little bit further back here. So at the moment, in terms of bearings and just referencing what Mr. Tuck was talking about question time, so the traffic or the cars, vehicles which enter his car park at the moment would come in off the Braintree Road down here through these Fossey's residential houses and then carry on down here through Cutthroat Lane, and the entrance to his car park currently is just opposite where the proposed opening in the wall is there. So this is a photo just to put in context what I was saying. So you can see the residential flats immediately next to the road here. This is the wall with a partial wooden fence in front of it. There is an existing pedestrian and cycle access through here, although there's some barriers to sort of slow cyclists down for safety. But there is a gap here, so pedestrians and cyclists can get through at the moment, although visibility as you sort of step out from that is limited by the wall at the moment. And then this is a photo from the other side, so the same section of wall. This is the pedestrian cycle access at the moment that I referred to. This is the section of wall broadly here, which is proposed to be removed. This is the entrance to Mr. Tuck's car park. So this is broadly what the applicant was proposing. So rather than knocking down the wall and creating a vehicular access through, it was proposed that some alternative arrangement would be proposed whereby there is the ability for vehicles to go through in the future. There is improved pedestrian and cycle connectivity immediately following the demolition of the wall. But like I say, vehicles wouldn't be allowed through initially. The reason for not allowing vehicles through is there's a number of issues with the junction. In effect, what we would be doing if we allowed vehicles through would be creating an all-movements junction. So Cutthroat Lane at the moment, whilst narrow, does have traffic running through both ways. So that's open to vehicles, although its vehicular use is very limited past the entrance to Mr. Tuck's car park because it leads up to the level crossing on the railway line to which vehicles can't cross. But there are some vehicles that go through for servicing of a building down the road. And the situation here, this is what the applicant has done to try and demonstrate the situation. This would be showing what we'd be creating. So Mr Tuck's car park would be opposite, and obviously you would have traffic being able to enter there from both Cutthroat Lane and the road opposite, and exit in both directions. You'd also have the potential for motorists to be turning down Cutthroat Lane in both directions, however unlikely that might be, that exists. And there would be, as it stands at the moment, restricted visibility as well in both directions. Part of the reasons we've set out in the committee report was that Cutthroat Lane is being used as a sustainable travel corridor, and it's something which we're keen to encourage. The development to the northeast of Witham, which is being built out at the moment by Bellway, that is providing new cycle connectivity to Cutthroat Lane, and that is partially with an aim of encouraging residents from that part of the town to be able to walk and cycle within a safe environment towards the station and towards the town. Obviously, if this junction arrangement were introduced as it is at the moment, whereas at the moment pedestrians and cyclists can travel through this stretch of road safely and with limited conflict with vehicles, that would obviously change, and there would be effectively a change in priorities here, where we would have to be considering how to keep it safe for pedestrians and cyclists passing and vehicles crossing over. So that would be the disadvantage at the moment of doing this. I think it's worth pointing out that when the inspector considered this in the original report, when the permission was granted, they acknowledged that simply demolishing the wall would not be enough to allow vehicular access through, but it would require third-party land and work by the Highway Authority and others to come up with a scheme which would allow vehicles to pass safely. What we are doing, though, because there is a local plan policy in the new local plan and in the old one, which looks at a potential highway improvement, providing a connection between this road and through to Albert Road, so effectively cutting through Mr Tuck's there at the moment. So that is a highway scheme that the District Council has identified as an aspiration in the local plan. So there's no commitment to deliver that, but it would be a material consideration if the car park ever were to be redeveloped in the future. And this junction could be reconsidered at that point. The purpose of the variation and the 106 variation that's being proposed by officers is that Morrisons would be required to demolish the wall, carry out such highway works on their land so as that vehicles could access across Cutthroat Lane or onto Cutthroat Lane in the future, if that was considered desirable and agreed by the Highway Authority, but that following the demolition of the wall and the highway works, there would be physical barriers put in place to prevent vehicles accessing, to prevent those issues. So we're safeguarding the potential for a scheme in the future, but we're not delivering it directly through this. What we are delivering through this would be further improvements to pedestrian and cycle connectivity. So, as we've set out there, we're proposing that the 106 is varied slightly, so the existing 106 is varied, but only in respect of the highway works, just so that it's clear what Morrisons are required to do. So, in summary, it's only the condition, the condition in regards to the highway works that we're considering. We're not considering any of the other conditions that applied. As it stands at the moment, following the demolition of the wall, safe vehicular access cannot be provided to Cutthroat Lane, and that's been driven by the assessment of the Highway Authority. So the scheme that's been presented or has been worked upon by Morrisons has been drawn up in accordance with the wishes of the Highway Authority. We recommend that the wording of the condition is varied, so that it removes the reference to and vehicles, so there is no immediate requirement to provide vehicular access through. But the 106 will provide clarity as to the extent of the highway works to safeguard that future scheme. So we're satisfied that this is in accordance with the local plan policy, which has an aspiration for the highway link in the future. We acknowledge that it may be preferential for the car park operator to have direct access through, and members certainly did discuss this at the previous meeting. I think this was one of the situations, as often with planning, where we're trying to weigh up different benefits and different harms. So whilst there may be some benefit in terms of the highway network, in terms of traffic coming off the main road more quickly and being able to access the car park more directly and not having to pass through a residential street, The harm that we identified was the conflict with this sustainable travel corridor, which we think is very important to the growth of the town and to encouraging people to walk and cycle, particularly on shorter journeys towards the station and towards the town centre. So overall, we were comfortable, and members were comfortable following discussion at the previous meeting, that the scheme should be approved as is. So no changes are proposed here, no changes to conditions or what the previous recommendation. Again, the only reason for reporting this back is the delay in the Section 106. I'm sorry to report that unfortunately it's the County Council that has again delayed us in terms of progressing the application. We're trying to gain clarity from their legal services team as to the precise wording that they require, so that the 106 can be drafted in a way that is clear precisely what it is the applicant is required to do. It's incredibly frustrating for officers that we've had this delay. It has been escalated, and we'll continue to press to engage. And as soon as we can, we will agree a draft agreement with the developer, and I will be very hopeful that the developer will agree that in a timely manner and then proceed to get the necessary highway works agreement and demolish the wall. So that's the presentation that I was planning to give on the application, but obviously if members again have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer those. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, as the officer said, there's a number of conflicting and competing priorities here, and whilst I think we don't have much alternative but to grant this tonight, whilst noting that once again the County Council is causing the issues of the legal delays, I would sound a word of very strong caution about this idea of a link road going through there. I've always opposed it. I tried to get it out of the local plan many years ago. Whilst I hear what Mr Tuck says, and he's absolutely right, it'll improve access directly to his car park, and it will provide relief for about a third of Albert Road. It'll introduce more traffic into the other 2/3 of Albert Road. And what it will do is create a rat run. Anyone who knows the way traffic functions in Whitton, particularly at peak times, knows that the issue is the B1018, and the pinch point is the railway bridge, Collingwood Road. All this traffic will be doing is ending up back at exactly the same point as it would have done if it had carried on the B1018, which is the junction next to the railway bridge. But then it'll have to be waiting, queuing, to turn left. I think there's a restriction on turning right. Anyway, waiting to turn left towards the town centre. Now, when the railway station redevelopment application came forward some years ago, I said to County Council, why don't we, and to BDC, why don't we look at this whole site in terms of traffic circulation, because it's very acute. There's a lot of residents, it's tightly packed. You've got the railway station, lots of people living around it, lots of businesses, and increasing amounts of congestion. But that opportunity wasn't taken either. So I think we should be careful what we wish for here. What we would be creating with this road is a rat run, where people would get frustrated at the Morrison's roundabout, dive off down there, and then just be queuing along Albert Road outside the railway station instead of queuing on the B1018. We'd have two loads of queues. But that said, I'm happy to move what we've got in front of us, because I know it's a long-standing part of planning that goes back on this site a long way. The wall is going to be demolished. But personally, I'm very happy that for now it's being kept cycle pedestrian access only. And as Neil said, that's another issue, because if that road is ever punched through, that's going to be cutting straight across Cutthroat Lane, which is currently our #1 means of getting cyclists in from the north of the town to the town centre. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does it find a seconder before I move on? Councillor Abbott, you did indicate you wish to speak. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you again, Madam Chairman. This is very similar to the first item on the agenda. We discussed this at great length in May, and there haven't been any material changes since then, and no significant changes in the assessment of proposals by officers against the development plan. Hear what Councillor Abbott says, agree with him totally, but we've got to deal with what we've got before us tonight on the table. Therefore, I don't think there is any other option but to grant permission as we agreed before, and again regret the delay in County Council administration very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Parkin.
Thank you. I do have quite a bit of sympathy for Mr Duck's position, and I use that car park myself and collect people from Whittam Station. And just as I always, I never actually turn right near the bridge. I always turn right just opposite the station and cut back through a residential street down to the main roundabout near Morrison. So when the car park's operating at full capacity, I can imagine there's quite a considerable amount of congestion that's caused on those residential streets. Having said all that, I think Neil is completely right. This is where we're faced with conflicting needs. Yes, I mean, I do completely fully accept that there is the desire not to sort of interfere with that sustainable transport cycling corridor for Whittam. Having said that, I would also remind members that obviously train travel is sustainable travel, but for the people who don't live in towns, they do need to have a car park which they can use in order to access the sustainable travel. So it is important that we retain car parks. Admittedly, the car park is fairly empty at the moment. How long that is going to continue probably is anyone's guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to back up the comments made by my colleagues about this with regards to the sustainability of the active travel there. I think that's really important for the future of Whittam going forward, considering the amount of building that's going on. And I think there's plenty of space for vehicles. They may well be at peak times parking on the road, but hopefully in the future it's really important that we encourage as many of our residents to seek not only foot traffic but cycleways and e-scooters, and as Councillor Parker mentioned, the ability to virtually walk to the train station is important. So I back that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wish to add anything? No. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Abbott and seconded by Councillor Mann. All those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? One abstention. That application has been granted. Before I come to the next application, can I just ask Councillor Mrs Beavers, as she arrived after I started, do you have any declarations of interest to make?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We now come on to application 5C, application 21-00411 for land at the airfield Earlscombe. This can be found on pages 150 to 171, and I do have people wishing to make a statement on this application. The first person wishing to make a statement is Mr. Ben Hobbs. He is one of the applicants. Thank you. I'll remind you, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Councillors. My name is Ben Hobbs, and I recently joined my father, Malcolm, at Hobbs Estates at Earlscombe Airfield, having previously worked within the land and planning profession at other medium to large development companies. I'm a qualified chartered surveyor and have over 8 years industry experience, much of which was accrued working within the Essex region. As a director of Hobbs Estates, I'm pleased that these latest proposals are before you tonight with a recommendation for planning permission from your officers. This latest extension to the business park forms part of our Forest Lane site that we worked alongside the Marks Hall estate to bring forwards. It is one of the few remaining growth areas on the park and has the benefit of outline planning permission for employment development. The outline permission is for B1, B2 and B8 use. The proposed haulage use, whilst in planning terms is sui generis, is not at all dissimilar in character to the B1 and B8 uses which have already been approved here. Furthermore, the site is within an employment policy area within the recently adopted local plan. We have worked hard to meet planning officers' expectations, particularly with regards to the design of the new office building, as well as the landscaping, which will help to soften and screen the development in its surroundings. We have also been able to respond to other technical requirements, and there are no objections from statutory consultees. I would hope that the planning officers that we have dealt with on this project will be able to confirm that we have been very collaborative in our approach. Those councillors familiar with the business park will know that we operate and manage a very successful employment area for the district with a range of firms ranging from offices to manufacturing as well as storage and haulage businesses. We believe that these proposals are therefore entirely suited to the area, with the chosen landscaping and design being complementary to the location. Our prospective tenant for this development, David Watson Transport, are highly motivated to move from their existing premises on the business park to this new area. It has been planned to meet their business requirements, not least because the new offices will be their headquarters for the whole of their operation. The new premises will safeguard their continued operation at the airfield and assist them in meeting their future growth aspirations, including the creation of a further 20 jobs. It will also improve safety and security at the business park by enabling them to park lorries within a properly secure and designated yard area. In addition to this, it will free up David Watson Transport's old building for a new occupier, which will bring even more jobs to the area. I would encourage all councillors to agree the planning officer's recommendation and vote in favour of approving the application for the reasons I've just outlined to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. I now call upon the second worst person wishing to make a statement. It's also Mr. Hobbs. Thank you, Mr. Hobbs.
That was the new, now you get the old, I'm afraid. I'm sorry for any repetition. Good evening, Madam Chairman and councillors. As many of you may already know, I'm Malcolm Hobbs and my family run and own the business park at Earls Cone. The very brief history is that my father bought a derelict airfield back in the 1960s, which he farmed until the 1980s, and then with the help of councillors and planning officer at Braintree District Council, we turned an unproductive area of the airfield into a small business park. Since then, we've added the Essex Golf and Country Club and grown the business park into a thriving community which employs around 1,500 people and has a leisure facility offering a multitude of recreation and sporting opportunities, and also has a large hotel on site. We've also planted over 25,000 trees and shrubs, created more than a dozen ponds and wetland areas, and have large grassland areas for walkers, runners and community activities. As part of the next phase of our development, we entered into an agreement with Marks Hall Estate to develop the area we now call Forest Lane, and the application before you tonight is the second part of that new area. This application was submitted in February 2021, so it's been a very long journey to get it before you tonight. And yet it was a site already benefiting from outline consent for B1, B2 and B8, and had a draft allocation in the emerging local plan. So it should have been a very straightforward application in my view. We have tried and tried to get this to committee for many months, over a year in fact, and I'm afraid that I must point out how detrimental and damaging this timeframe has been for our business and also for David Watson Transport Limited, who are hoping to occupy this site. We have worked as collaborative as possible with the two officers we have had on this project, and yet we have been faced with multiple delays throughout for no apparent reason. You will see by the covering letters attached to this and the images that this should be a non-contentious application, as the occupier of this site will be an existing business on the business park, David Watson Transport Limited. They have a very successful crane offload haulage business which has been operating on the business park for over 30 years, but in multiple locations around the park. This site gives them the opportunity to relocate all their vehicles into one secure and safe area, along with a new HQ modular building which will allow them to relocate office staff from other locations in Suffolk to Earls Cone. There will be minimal extra HGV movements, but the opportunity to secure the existing 50 or so jobs and create up to 20 new office positions in the next few years. I hope you agree this is a welcome chance to further employment within the district, as it seems lots of new houses are being built, but not many commercial applications coming forward to create places for these new people to work locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the end of people wishing to make a statement on this application. We'll now come to the presentation, which is going to be made by Janine. Good evening, Janine.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks permission to use the land as sui generis use as a haulage yard that has previously been granted permission, together with the land to the south of the site, to redevelop up to 10,000 square metres of B1, B2, B8 employment floor space. The southern part of the site is subject to a reserved matters application relating to 2 industrial buildings and open storage, However, this application is still under review. The proposed haulage yard site will be located within an employment policy area, as set out within the local plan. Whilst the proposal would be contrary to policy LPP3 of the adopted local plan, given the sui generis use, it would introduce a comparable employment use in line with the objectives of the policies contained within LPP2 and LPP3 of the adopted local plan, delivering economic and social benefits to the local community consistent with the national planning policy framework. The proposal will also continue and benefit an existing business and workers within the Earls Cone employment area. The supporting information accompanying the application states that the haulage yard will enable the relocation of David Watson Transport, who currently operate on the site within the Earls Cone Business Park, and the site and new offices will enable the company to expand the numbers of employees within the offices and the operational needs of the business to expand to meet the current operator's licence. The site would include a hard surfacing which has been installed, a green palisade security fencing, landscaping and parking, together with the erection of a two-storey building for office use, creating 250 square metres of floor space, specifically designed to accommodate the David Watson Transport. The proposal for a sui generis use on this employment land allocated would be acceptable. Given the nature of a sui generis use, should the operation cease as a haulage yard in the future, a full application would be required for any other use. The appearance of the building has been subject to extensive discussions. The building is of a modular design, offering a flexible, cost-effective method of construction. And following extensive engagement and discussions with the applicant during the course of the application, the proposed building is now well articulated and interesting, providing an enhancement to the redevelopment of this site. In addition, the proposed landscaping to the area has been enhanced significantly during the course of the application, whereby the existing tree bund to the west elevation is to be retained, but all the other boundaries of the site have actually been enhanced with the tree planting and shrub planting to the north, east and southern boundaries. The green palisade fencing has already been installed, but as you can see, the landscaping will have a bund in front, providing a landscape boundary to the site. The following photos provide context of the site. So this is the main entrance, which has always been previously granted in the outline consent. And this is a bund whereby additional landscaping will be installed. The extent of the hard standing surface on the site. And as you can see in front of the green palisade fencing, there is also an area to provide extra landscaping. And this is the southern part of the site whereby the reserved matters scheme will come forward in due course. To summarise, the application site is located within a designated employment area, and this proposal is for a sui generis use as a haulage yard. While the proposal would be contrary to policy LPP3 of the adopted local plan, given the sui generis use would introduce a comparable employment use in line with the objectives of the adopted local plan, delivering economic and social benefits to the community. The proposal would also continue to benefit an existing business and workers within the Earls Cone employment area. The design and scale of the proposed office building is considered to be of high quality, enhancing the overall character and appearance of the area, and the proposed landscaping will be a welcome addition. There are no adverse impacts from the proposed development that have been identified in terms of consultees. Highways has been assessed by both Essex County Council and the National Highways with no objections. There would be no harm arising to the neighbouring residential amenity, environmental health, ecology or flooding, subject to a number of conditions to mitigate against any potential harm. The proposal is therefore acceptable to officers and recommended to grant planning permission subject to conditions.
Thank you very much, Janine. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is within my ward. Thank Janine very much for her presentation. So I'm very pleased to have this before us this evening. I do understand the frustrations from the applicant and also from David Watson Transport on the length of time that they feel it's taken to get us to this point tonight. And, you know, some of the reasons were outside of anybody's control and revolved around the approval of the local plan in July and then the change to our 5-year housing supply. And that led to a number of our planning committees being cancelled, which is extremely unusual for us, and reports and decisions having to be written and rewritten and so on. There were also, as Janine has said, quite lengthy discussions about the appearance and design and the landscaping, which I know officers had some concerns about. But the result is that we have an application before us tonight which is high quality in appearance, and there are no objections from the parish council, and it does seem that we have an application which officers are content to approve, so to recommend approval rather. So I know it's taken a while, but we've got here, and I'm pleased to move officers' recommendation on this. I know the business park very well. David Watson Transport have been there a while, and this is quite central to their desire, as I understand it, to remain on the business park where they can expand. And that will help, no doubt, with the local economy and local employment, which is a good thing. As I say, no objections from the parish council. The lighting appears to be acceptable, and we have a condition 6 with a lighting plan. And National Highways also consulted and have not objected. So overall, I think this is an entirely good application, and I'm very pleased to move approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs. Sprague. Does that find a seconder? And Councillor Mr. Beavers, you did indicate you wish to speak. Would you like to speak? No.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm more than happy to second the proposal by Councillor Gabrielle Spray, and noting in her words that she is the ward member, but, you know, one would like to think, such is the expanse of the development there, that actually there's a heck of a lot of people from around this district that either work on the site or use the leisure facilities. So it's not just about a ward, it's actually about a district. And in some respects, I don't actually think the report really reflects the success of what Mr. Hobbs and his family have created in Earlscone over all these years. When we talk about business growth, we talk about employment, we talk about the huge leisure facilities there in terms of golf and swimming and tennis. I mean, these are big facilities, and there's even a specialist dentist tucked away in the corner of the estate that does some pretty serious referrals for the local dentists in our district. So, I mean, it really is a site for all of us. So I was really disappointed to hear from Mr. Malcolm Hobbs this evening. I mean, such a professional in our district, and complaining about the way that, you know, it's taken so long and time has been lost. And that's really disappointing. And, you know, whatever the answers are, quite frankly, is not good enough. You know, this is big business in our district, and, you know, I am disappointed, and I think whatever, we need to learn the lessons. Personally, I would quite like a written response as to what the issues were, and we've got it then, and I can even submit a written question. I understand that, but I'm delighted, really delighted to second this, and I hope now that this can move on speedily and for the good of our district. And thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Beavers. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, commend the applicants for the employment they're providing, and I was particularly interested to read the report, and it was repeated during the contributions. About, I think, 25,000 trees have been planted on the site, which is very impressive. That brings me on to the issue I want to raise, which ultimately this is a site in a fairly rural area, so we have to make sure the impacts are mitigated as much as possible. And as you might expect me to raise, I am still concerned about the lighting, which came up on a previous discussion on this site. I had a very good look this afternoon at the proposals. There's, I think, 4 documents on the file. They're proposing 6 and 8 metre high columns, which is quite urbanising, but they're flat to ground lights, which is good, so they only shine downwards. The lux levels look to be reasonable, but the lighting report clearly stated that there are potential impacts, particularly where the lights are close to existing screen bunding trees, which are obviously bat habitats. Bats tend to fly along the hedge lines and tree lines. In those reports, it mentions a number of things which are going to be fitted to the lights, including rear baffles, dimmers and timers. But it says that the author of the report says, I recommend these are used, but then doesn't go into any detail. In condition 6 at the start, it says details with regards to the hours of lighting and lighting security measures shall be submitted, and then it goes on to say, and then in accordance with those plans. I think that's critical to the impact this will have. So what lighting engineers never do is consider lighting in the real world. They always consider it almost as if it's on the moon in a vacuum. Bright lighting will produce all sorts of scattering effects and reflection. One of the effects which is often missed is concrete. Fresh concrete, and there's a lot of fresh concrete we saw on those slides, will reflect back into the sky about 30% of the light that hits it. So having this plethora of column-mounted lights on if they are on all night, would have a significant local effect on light pollution in a rural area. So whilst I'm not going to object to it, can I ask officers that condition 6 to be slightly reworded? I think where it says prior to the installation, details with regards to hours of lighting, that's in there, but that then needs to be followed through. What are the hours? So are the lights going to go off late evening? And I don't know what the next bit means. Lighting security measures. I would suggest we reword that to say lighting shielding measures, because that's what it says in the actual lighting reports, that they're proposing to put shields on the back of the lights to stop the light shining into the trees. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Would someone like to come back on that, please?
Through you, Chairman, yes, we can add that to the wording of the condition.
Councillor Mrs Wilson.
I just want to say something. I'm quite new to planning, but I've actually lived in the area of this airfield for 50 years, and I've watched it progress, and it has been amazing and done in a very good way, with the leisure centre, the business and everything else, and also particularly of interest, the new cycle route. I know Mr Hobbs and his family and everything have been quite involved in the new cycle route from Earlscombe through to Coggeshall, and have given land and are very supportive. So I think, I used to go and pick potatoes, actually, on that airfield. I never had such a good figure again. But, I think, really, I can only say everything has been done with regard to this development, not just this development, but the whole of the airfield. And it is brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to throw a slightly different twist on the lighting, in that it's an active airfield, and at either end of the airfield there isn't any development at the moment, and it's just the safety of the aircraft, and also where if this is now a building that's going to encroach into the approach of the airfield, you've got the air ambulance based there as well. I kind of thought, is it going to squeeze in? But I can see from an aerial picture that actually it's quite far over. But it's just making sure on the airfield safety, if the lighting has been considered, and should an aircraft overshoot or something like that, that there is these bunds that go around the palisade fence is sufficient protection for the new officers. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Thank you.
You want to come back? Thank you, Chris. Janine.
Sorry. Yeah, we did consult with the airfield, and there was no objections received, and there is a no-fly zone to the north of the site. So hopefully this site would not contain any aircraft.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chris. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just come back on 2 points. Just, Councillor Abbott, just in terms of the lighting condition, so going back to condition 6. Just to be clear, so the revised wording, lighting shielding measures, we can incorporate. You also mentioned about the hours, which is covered in terms of details of hours would come forward for approval. So that would be something for the applicant to set out and for that matter to be considered. Are you, I just want to be clear on that, so we're not specifying hours, specific hours within the wording of the condition. It's the details would come forward for approval.
Yeah, that's correct. The consultants' report specifically say that they recommend that all of these measures are employed because they recognise the sensitivity, but there's nothing specified. So it's obviously up for discussion.
Yeah.
But I think what they're getting at, and what I would support, is that the lights are either significantly dimmed down or go off late at night, or both. And they're not, you know, we're not left with them blasting away all night long.
So if it would be helpful, we could always add an informative to the decision to help inform the submission of that discharge condition application, something along those lines, potentially, if members were amenable to that. So that was in respect to the condition. I do just want to come back on the point that's been raised about the delay on the application. So obviously as officers we try to move every application forward as quickly as possible. The team work incredibly hard to be able to do that. There's been a number of reasons for the delay for this particular case, some of which relate to consultations, others relate to the proposal and actually the requirement to assess a proposal that is contrary to the allocation, and consider whether or not the employment that's proposed to be generated is actually acceptable in this particular case. There's been issues around design, layout, landscaping, national highways as well. We've had to go back to query responses with them and also Essex County Council highways. There's been, I would say, engagement on both sides, so I accept that there's been a delay, but there has been engagement in both sides, and that is also against the context that there was no pre-application in respect to this proposal. So, as always, we encourage any developer to come forward to submit pre-applications so that we are able to have those conversations and discussions before an application is submitted, particularly where it is contrary to either an outline consent or an allocation. So, I do accept there's been a delay in this case, and we've had direct conversations with the applicant about that. We've done what we can to move the thing forward. But I think it's important to highlight there's been a lot of engagement from officers' side in respect to this proposal.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Schwer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Notwithstanding the comments about the time that this has taken to come forward from the outline, I'd just like to welcome this application and what it's doing for not only the area of Earlscombe but Braintree district as well, with regards to employment. And I think that ripples out to the well-being of all of our residents as well. And following on from Councillor Abbott's mention about the trees and the ponds, it's great to see how sustainability can go along with commercial application and all that that can do for the benefit of this part of North Essex. I think it's really important. And I welcome this in all of those respects, along with all the other facilities and entertainment on site, but with all of the commercial applications as well. And I just ought to declare that I'm an MPI because I actually go to that dentist on the airfield, and it's very good, and I recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spear. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Mrs. Beavers that we approve this application. I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, members. That is unanimous. That now brings us on to application 5D. Application 220147, full land adjacent to Butler's Wood, Waldegrave Wood, west of the A131, in the parishes of Bulmer and Twinstead on Sudbury Road, Bulmer. This can be found on pages 172 to 228. This is another one coming back to us. I do have speakers on this application. The first person which is going to make a statement is Mr. John Bevan. He is for the National Grid Electricity Substation. Good evening, Mr. Bevan. We've met before.
Thank you, Chair and members. I'm John Bevan, Senior Project Manager at National Grid Electricity Transmission. Following the deferral of the application back in August, we have made a number of changes to our plans that address comments from members. Firstly, we have moved the footprint of the grid supply point 19 metres further away from the A131. This means the substation compound is now almost 50 metres from the road. Any further setback would result in the GSP becoming visible from other locations and specifically settlements from the west. By moving the substation compound further away from the road, we have been able to increase the landscape screening through new tree planting and landscape mounds. Our revised plans create a much broader landscape bund and a more gradual gradient. A mixture of woodland and tree planting would occupy this space. This has been supported by the Council's tree officer. Overall planting has increased by over 40% through the revised plans. The proposals deliver biodiversity net gain in excess of 10%. The changes we have made further enhance the biodiversity value of the site. We have used best practice methodologies to calculate this beyond what is required in policy, and the Council's ecology consultants are satisfied they are accurate. Finally, we note this committee's concerns around lighting. We would like to take the opportunity to reconfirm that the lighting will only trigger and turn on when people are at the site. As site visits are infrequent and usually during the day, the lighting is likely to only be required during an emergency. We have offered an amended planning condition which requires the submission of a lighting design scheme prior to the installation of any external lighting at the site. The revised condition also takes account of temporary lighting installed during construction to give the committee further reassurance. We are pleased that the amended condition has been endorsed by the Council's ecology consultants. We hope that the changes and clarifications outlined today give members the confidence to endorse the officer's recommendation for approval. This application is key to reinforcing the electricity network between Bramford and Twinstead by 2028. It will support delivering the transition to cleaner, greener energy and ensuring the UK's energy security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evan. Thank you very much indeed. And there's no one else wishing to make a statement on this application, so I'll go to the presentation, which is going to be made by Juliet.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. So this is an application on land adjacent to Butlers Wood and Waldegrave Wood for a new 132 kilovolts grid supply point substation, including 2 supergrid transformers, associated buildings, equipment, switchgear, single circuit cable ceiling, end compound, a new access, associated landscaping and drainage. Members will recall that this application was considered at Planning Committee on the 23rd of August, where it was agreed to defer consideration as officers were asked to explore with the applicant the feasibility of moving the existing pylon nearest the A131 further west to facilitate moving the substation compound and therefore increase the landscaping and screening area to be created. Members also sought clarification regarding the calculation of the biodiversity net gain and requested for the applicant to provide further detail related to external lighting and a landscaping plan. Just to recap, members, on the context of the application site, the site measures approximately 7 hectares and is situated between 2 ancient woodlands and local wildlife sites, known as Butlers Wood to the north and Waldegrave Wood to the south. The map to the right shows its location in proximity to surrounding villages. Wickham St Paul is to the southwest and Twinstead is to the southeast. We can see the A131 to the east, and there are public rights of way surrounding the site. This is the existing site plan. It is currently arable land bounded by hedgerows, which we can see, with 2 pylons passing through the site, which are here and here. These pylons are approximately 45 to 50 metres high and hold the existing 400 kilovolt line. These are the photographs taken within the site. We can see Butlers Wood and Waldegrave Wood either side and the existing pylons. The top photograph is taken looking towards the A131, and the lower photograph is taken looking towards the west. And in these photographs here, the top photograph was taken from the A131 travelling in a southerly direction. We can see the site on the right and the pylon nearest to the road. The lower photograph is taken from within the site looking towards the A131, and again we can see the pylons, 2 pylons in there. So this is the previous block plan that members considered at the meeting in August. Particular concern was raised regarding this pylon here to the east and the proximity to the A131. Members asked officers to explore with National Grid the feasibility of moving this pylon westwards so that the substation could also move further away from the A131 to create a larger area of landscaping and screening on the road frontage, so in this area here. As members will have seen in the committee report, National Grid have explained in detail why moving this pylon itself would give rise to a number of technical difficulties. However, National Grid have explored what could be done to move the substation further westwards, and following discussions with their potential main works contractors, they've come up with an innovative approach in the submission of this revised scheme, which is a deviation from the standard design specification. So the scheme proposes to move the footprint of the grid supply points a further 19 metres to the west without moving the pylon, but as we can see, the downleads are coming off at an angle. The revised scheme creates a separation of approximately 44 metres from the A131 at its closest point, whereas previously this was 25 metres. This increased separation allows for more planting to be facilitated. This is the detailed landscaping plan that has been submitted for consideration. And we can see here on the eastern bund, by moving the substation westwards, has allowed for more space for planting and enables the slopes of the mounding to be slackened to include an area of woodland mix, including a small percentage of larger trees. The landscape tree officer has reviewed the indicative planting mixes and considers these to be acceptable and suitable to the location. The proposal will result in the loss of approximately 34 metres of hedgerow to facilitate the access, and that's up here indicated by this pink dashed line. However, it is proposed to reinstate a further 45 metres of hedgerow adjacent and along the access track, which we can see here. At the previous committee meeting, clarification was sought regarding the calculation of the biodiversity net gain. The full calculations are set out in Annex 1 of the Biodiversity Net Gain report, which accompanies the application. This has been done using the Biodiversity Metric Free calculation tool. The Ecology Officer has stated in their consultation response, "We are satisfied that the biodiversity net gain baseline has been appropriately calculated and that the mitigation hierarchy has been followed and that the submitted metric calculations meet the trading rules for habitat creation, for compensation and delivery of net gain." So the proposal will deliver over 10% biodiversity net gain. So this drawing is indicative and shows the impact of the screen planting through a site section as would be visible from the A131. So just to give members a bit of context, this is the access to the north of the site, and we can see the representative height of the trees within Waldegrave and Butler's Wood and the existing pylon here. The different shading of the trees reflects how the screening would advance over the years. So the lighter green shows the maximum height of planting at 15 years and the darker green shows the maximum height of planting at year 5. And then we can also see the bund here as well. In officers' opinion, the bund and landscaping will result in significant screening of the equipment and negate any significant landscape and visual impact. This is the proposed floor plan for the grid supply point. We can see to the west here, there are 10 modular type buildings proposed for office, welfare facilities and also to accommodate electrical equipment. At the previous committee meeting, there was a concern raised around external lighting and the detail that had been provided with the application. National Grid have clarified that the substation is unmanned, so site visits are infrequent and usually during the day. Therefore, lighting will only turn on when people visit the site or in the event of an emergency, in which case the purpose of the lighting would be to enable safe movement to vehicles and pedestrians within the substation perimeter. The lighting proposed would be a low-level emitting type with a directable output triggered by a motion. Fencing is proposed to be installed around the site for security and safety purposes, but therefore obviously keep wildlife out, so would not activate so that they don't activate the lighting. We are proposing to amend the lighting condition, which requires a lighting scheme to be submitted to include reference to temporary lighting, which would be required during the construction. The ecology officer has been consulted and is satisfied with the proposed rewording of the condition. Once a lighting design scheme is submitted to discharge the condition, the ecology officer would be consulted again to review the lighting scheme that's been put forward. So following the revisions and clarifications sought, officers are content that National Grid have done as much as feasibly possible to address the concerns previously raised by members, and are satisfied that the amendments submitted overcome the issues raised. There are no significant landscape visual impacts, and the impacts have been reduced further by the amendments with the increased screening area proposed adjacent to the A131. In terms of the planning balance, we have assessed the adverse impacts of the proposal against the public benefits. The proposal will alter the landscape, its character and appearance. However, the proposed bunds and planting would reinforce screening of the equipment. There is appropriate mitigation proposed to avoid direct and reduce indirect impacts on protected species, and there will be a localised loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. The impact on the trees and hedgerows is limited, given that there's an existing ditch between the woodlands and the field, which provides some protection for the tree roots. In terms of noise impact, no excessive impact is anticipated on neighbouring amenity. Looking at the benefits, the proposal would deliver in excess of 10% biodiversity net gain and increase ecological connectivity between the woodlands. The proposal also forms part of the wider strategy to distribute low carbon electricity in the district and beyond. So there are 22 conditions proposed to be imposed. These conditions largely remain as previously proposed and are set out in the committee report. However, members will note that the lighting condition has been amended, as I've previously mentioned, and the reworded version is on the screen to include reference to temporary lighting construction during the lighting required during construction. In conclusion, the benefits of the proposal are considered to outweigh the harms, and officers consider that the application should be approved with the revisions and conditions proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Members. Councillor Mr. Parker.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a much improved application. I think really our concern was whether or not the substation, which obviously will be an alien structure in this landscape, could be screened further, and I'm pleased at the revisions that have been made. I think it's particularly good that we're able to provide, or that it's possible to provide, sufficient area for landscaping to enable some larger trees to be planted. So yes, I'm happy with the revised application.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree with what Councillor Parker just said, and as with some other decisions, either we or higher authorities are going to have to make, the strengthening of the grid is going to be something we've got to grapple with, because in particular lots of good green energy coming in off the North Sea, which those who follow me on Twitter and I regularly tweet about, recently actually peaked at over 50% of the entire UK grid electricity was being provided by wind energy. and that's going up all the time. The average is a lot lower than that, but peaking at over 50% is remarkable. But yes, that does have some consequences, and this is one of them, development of a facility like this in the open countryside. I agree with Councillor Parker that the discussions with National Grid have been good, and moving the footprint back is good. Further landscape planting, excellent. So those are good things. On the lighting, the revised condition doesn't make sense because of the way the definitions are used. I hear what National Grid said, but at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that we didn't have the details before us at the last committee meeting. We still don't have them at this meeting. For something this big, we really should have had those details in front of us. So we're relying on them to come back. Now, I know they say that they're only going to be triggered when someone's present. So the first thing I'm going to ask for is, can that be included as an informative? That's what they're offering. So let's write it down and say that's what we're expecting you to do. Condition 9 then will define the detail of what that will be. But I'd like to add the words, as well as it says, to protect biodiversity, also dark rural landscape, because that's what it says in the National Planning Policy Framework, so we should be capturing that. And then in terms of the wording that's vague, it's a bit in bold, so that doesn't make sense as it stands. A lux level is the measurement of light intensity of a surface area at a given distance away from the source. So you need to define where that 20 lux is. Is that underneath the lights, or is it 100 metres away? So the normal way you define that is by saying something like the lux level should be approximately 20 lux peak in the horizontal plane, and then defining where, so within the area of construction, something like that. And then leave out the bit about lumen, because the lux, that defines how bright the lights are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. I have now got Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chair, I just want to agree with Councillor Parker on the comments that she made, that this is actually this application that has come back as a result of the prior application is much improved and will hugely benefit the local residents and the communities around. And I have to say that through the consultation process, I'm very pleased that so many people locally took part and were concerned about their future, and also that the parish councils totally took on board what was involved. But I want to mention the fact that I think it was good that we as a planning committee were able to voice those concerns and opinions that has resulted in this application coming here tonight with these amendments. And I thank National Grid for being flexible and approachable in their strategic design, especially in the engineering that they've been taking on to do that, because it does result and have a long-term effect on our residents and communities, and even those people that are passing and driving by. So overall, I commend this tonight, and I would move officer's recommendation subject to the informative from Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Does it find a seconder? Councillor Ritchie, I have also got you down to speak. Would you like to speak now?
Yes, please, Madam Chairman. I won't go too much on about this application, other than the fact that it's good that they have listened and taken time to consult with the concerns we had when we sent this for deferment a number of weeks ago. Interestingly enough, the Braintree 400 kilovolt substation up on Cressing Road was once fairly visible as you drove past that on your way to either Freeport or on your way to Cressing. That has somewhat mellowed now with the introduction of the tree planting there, and I hope that, that the new installation at Twinstead will, over time, become less seen as you drive either past it or having to drive within the vicinity of it. Really pleased that we've been able to prove the 10% net biodiversity gain as well as part of this development, and I won't say down too much what everyone else has said, but really good that we've been able to re-engage with a major national supplier and getting some of our concerns listened to and changed. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Mrs. Beavers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just mindful of the additional comments by our parish parish councils in terms of the landscape value. And I'm looking at page 199, 12.2.15, paragraph 2.5 of the appraisal sets out the assumed growth rates. So this is the bit I want to chat about, the assumed growth rates for planting at year 1 to year 15. And the landscape officer has commented that in the short term at year 1, that there is still going to be adverse impact in those early days. The reason I raise this is because myself and Councillor Monday on a site visit in Housestead a few weeks ago now, we were looking at a planting scheme, and to our horror, most of the trees along the boundary had died. And I mean, these weren't big trees. And I just wonder whether, bearing in mind the global effects of the hot summer and everything else, whether we're going to be in a position to actually ask, future developers to put in an actual watering scheme, because it really does quite concern me, actually, that, these trees are going to go in and they're not being cared for. So I would like some guarantee that actually the planting scheme is going to be maintained to be able to get to that, projection of the growth we saw in 15 years. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Mrs Beavers, I know you're quite new to the committee, but just recently we have been adding on that these schemes have to be watered. We have got in the wording, the tree planting wording, that they have to be watered and maintained properly. I'm correct, aren't I? Yes.
That's correct, Councillor Skeskerd. So, Councillor Beavis, I've referred to condition 12 in the published agenda, which states, which includes a provision for an irrigation and maintenance regime to be submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA as part of that landscaping proposal for that specific purpose.
Anyone else? No. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Swear and seconded by Councillor Ritchie that we approve this with the additional changes to the lighting conditions as requested by Councillor Abbott. Do we have those all recorded down? And are you happy with those, Councillor? So all those in favour? No. Those against? Me. Abstention. That's been granted. Thank you very much indeed. And now comes to application 5E, which is application 22-01414, Edinburgh Woolen Mill, 29 Bank Street, Braintree. This can be found on pages 229 to 242, and I do have a speaker, and this is a virtual speaker. Have we been able to make contact with Mr. Baker, the agent?
Spoken to Chairman, but we'll just see if he's there. Mr. Baker, can you hear us, please? Can you hear me, Mr. Baker? He doesn't seem to be able to, Madam Chairman, so I will read the statement.
Okay, Mr. Baker is the agent, and he's from the Planning Potential Limited in London, so maybe we can't make contact with London Business Authority. So I'll ask Councillor to read his statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am James Baker of Planning Potential, and I act as the planning consultant for Merkur Slots with regard to this planning application. I am here to speak in support of these proposals for a new adult gaming centre in Braintree Town Centre, following officers' recommendation for refusal. Adult gaming centres generate good levels of footfall, maintain high levels of pedestrian flow, and generate linked trips in the same way that traditional retail units do. The proposals will generate new local jobs, will ensure the long-term viability of a commercial building, and have a positive contribution to the evening economy, all of which have been recognised by your planning officer. As such, the proposals represent a form of sustainable economic development that should be supported. My clients' adult gaming centres are where people come to spend their spare change, have a game of bingo, and enjoy a favourite pastime in convenient locations. Furthermore, adult gaming centres do not provide fixed odds betting terminals, which are synonymous with betting shops. This is reflected in the average customer stake, which is 30 to 40p. If a market demand did not exist for this type of use, my client would not be seeking to locate here. Diversification and choice are key aspirations of local and national policy. It is accepted that there is sometimes a misconception as to how adult gaming centres operate in practice. It is important to understand that adult gaming centres are not noisy uses. The games appeal to individuals, not groups of people. Adult gaming centres are also strictly controlled in the way they operate. They do not serve alcohol and operate a Think 25 entrance policy. In addition, 48% of Mercur's customers are female. The application is also accompanied by a noise assessment which demonstrates that the proposed use will not give rise to adverse impacts upon residential amenity. I also want to emphasise that the comprehensive gambling licensing process, which considers matters regarding crime and disorder, was granted by the Council's licensing team with 24-hour opening on the 9th of August 2022, and also the fact that there was no objection to these proposals by the Council's Environmental Health team or the Police Service. The unit has been unoccupied for a considerable period of time, and the proposed adult gaming centre will bring a long-standing unoccupied unit back into active use, leading to a number of benefits for this part of the town, including aesthetic improvements to the exterior of the unit, particularly given the high level of vacancies in the vicinity of the application site. The proposals would adhere to local and national principles and guidance, offering a complementary town centre use that generates footfall, linked trips and pedestrian flows. I therefore consider that the proposals will not only maintain but enhance the vitality and viability of the town centre as a whole, which is within the overall spirit of the Council's town centre and shopping policies and the principles of the MPPF with regards to town centres. To this end, we therefore politely request that members uphold the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you for your time. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. That brings us to the end of statements on this application. And this application is going to be presented by Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. So, as referenced within the agent's statement, this is an application for the change of use of a ground floor from retail shop, so use class E, to an adult gaming centre, which is a sui generis use. I'll just run through the plan shortly, but just to say there is one correction within the report following the publication, is that the applicant has appealed against non-determination. So the decision we're asking from members this evening is to confirm the decision what the committee would have made in the context that it was still an application that could be formally determined, and that would then inform the council's position as part of the appeal process. In terms of the location plan, the site is located along Bank Street in Braintree, so fairly central within the town centre. We have the location plan here. You can just see we've got Swanside to the north and Great Square to the south. Slightly larger plan that shows the individual units, so it's number 29. It was previously occupied by Edinburgh Woolen Mill and has ceased to be in use since 2019. Again, I'll just run through the floor plans of the unit. So existing, and I'll show the proposed. So quite a large retail floor unit with a good frontage onto the street, and then just a view of the shop front as it exists. And then I should say as well, so the proposed shop front includes the related advertisement consent application, which is not before you this evening, just purely in relation to the change of use, but it just shows the shop front and then just a picture of the building. So I'm just going to briefly summarise and run through the key issues with this. I think it's important, given the context of the application, that members need to consider the material planning considerations in relation to this application, and primarily here we're looking at a change of use of the premises. So the starting point with any application is the development plan, so our recently adopted local plan, and the relevant policy, the key relevant policy we would say is policy LPP 10, which essentially defines our primary shopping centres and also areas of secondary frontage within the town centre. There's an acknowledgement that there needs to be a good balance between retail and non-retail uses within the town centre in order to maintain the viability and vitality of the whole of the town centre. But critically, the policy sets out that within primary frontages, there are several acceptable use classes that would be permissible, which includes use class E. So that would encompass retail, your traditional retail uses, but also classes F, so commercial and local community uses. So these are deemed to be acceptable within those primary areas of the town centre, so i.e. those really prominent retail frontages and frontages within, shopfront frontages within the town centre that you would traditionally associate with a shopping parade. And then there is an acknowledgement that in more secondary areas that other types of uses are more acceptable. So this is where the policy sets out things like pubs, drinking establishment, hot food takeaways, cinema, concert halls, music venues and so forth would be appropriate. So it's against that context that officers acknowledge that in terms of the use of the proposal, it may well be an acceptable use within the wider town centre because it's similar in nature to some of those uses that are identified along secondary frontages, but it is not a use, being a sui generis use, for the nature of the proposal that would accord with a primary shopping frontage. And that is essentially the key position that we take on the application. It's the location of the site and particularly really at the heart of the town centre. So there is a concern in principle with the change of use here that it would result in the loss of a key retail unit right in the heart of the town centre, and it would interrupt that retail frontage that wraps around in this part of the town centre. Saying all of that, we obviously need to be mindful of the fact that the proposal does bring forward some benefits, and as set out within the application submission and within the report, the unit has been vacant for several years now. The application has been accompanied by details that the unit has been marketed, but with that, we do need to, I suppose, as officers, raise a little bit of caution that part of that time has been during the pandemic, which obviously had a significant impact on retail and other town centre uses amongst other businesses and so forth. So we do feel that that may have impacted upon the success of that marketing exercise, particularly taking account the size of the unit and also where it's located in the town centre. It's also important to acknowledge that there would be some economic benefits arising from the proposal, not least from bringing the unit back into a beneficial use as part of the centre, so i.e. not a vacant, empty unit, and there would be obviously some employment generated from the use. But taking the round, officers remain concerned about the principle here of the use. So in terms of the recommendation, the officer view is that the use is inappropriate within the primary shopping frontage. It would result in that break in the primary retail frontage. Apologies, that should say retail rather than retain. Removing the activity associated with a sort of a traditional retail shop, which we say would be detrimental to the vitality and viability of the town centre, and therefore, as a consequence, the proposal would be contrary to our recently adopted local plan, and specifically policy LPP 10, but also the principles and guidance contained within the National Planning Policy Framework. So, contrary to the statement that you heard at public question time from the agent, the application is recommended for refusal by officers in accordance with the reason for refusal set out within the agenda papers for you. I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I think we have to oppose this change of use because it would introduce a break in the established retail frontage along that side of Bank Street, which is our primary shopping area in the town centre. I think it's essential that we attempt to encourage another shop within that premises. To do otherwise is against local plan policy. I don't, however, rule out the possibility, even the likelihood of this sort of use within the wider town centre, as the officers have remarked. We've got to diversify town centre, attract sort of new uses to keep it alive. So there may well be a place for an adult gaming centre in the secondary shopping areas or somewhere else in the town centre, Braintree town centre. But I think definitely not here. So I'm happy, Madam Chairman, to move officer's recommendation.
So that is what you would have decided if we'd had the ability to do so. Thank you very much, Councillor. Does it find a seconder? Councillor Ritchie, you have indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Chris, for the clarification. I think by setting out the way you did, it's made it exceptionally clear around the decision that we have before us this evening. And just to echo some of Councillor Mann's comments, likely that it may reappear at some stage in the future, somewhere else on the high street. And I'd certainly take his points around having to diversify and gives additional attractions for the town centre. Personally, the way things are at the moment, with the cost of living, introducing an adult gaming centre, I think morally it's a little bit of the other way as far as I'm concerned. But grateful that we have strong planning balance to be able to go with officers' recommendations for refusal this time round. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This being my ward, I would like to see the town centre retail units come into use and certainly encourage more footfall. And with the advent of online shopping and then compounded with the pandemic, I fear that you're not necessarily going to get the traditional retail units that we once would have expected into the high street in and out over the years. I echo Councillor Ritchie's comments on the adult gaming side, in that with the current climate you're going to chase that penny and you're never going to catch it. If I remember right, when I was in the industry it was 77%, so it was always a 23% loss guaranteed, which is the profit to the retailer. And I think, did I hear right, they've got a 24-hour licence, and therefore I'm not sure that we want to encourage use in the wee small hours, in that there's a lot of these units being brought forward for flats and other accommodation, which I kind of don't agree with in the sense of parking and so on. But certainly, if you've got the pubs turning out, I would hope that the operator would have stringent entry requirements, that if someone's rather intoxicated, they're not going to get in, but it's a potential for attracting people attempting to get in the first place, and potential antisocial behaviour and so on. So whilst I agree I wouldn't want to see a 24-hour gaming centre, I'm not sure what other use you could get in there, although the marketing of the unit, I do know that the council's consultant that we've had helping us to regenerate has said that retail has tanked and therefore it's not the sort of market. I honestly don't know what else, and this retailer appears to have many sites across the country and have had many turned down and have had many successes at appeal with planning inspectors. So I can't say either way, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hensman. Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you. Interesting application, because it, I think, draws quite clearly the distinction between a planning application and a licensing application. So from a purely planning point of view, I completely agree with Councillor Mann. I think the planning policy position is very clear. It is contrary to our local plan in the primary shopping frontage area. This use is not a use that is permitted under our policy, and therefore I think the decision would be fairly clear for me that this application should be refused for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Parker, question you wish to...
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Apologies, Councillor Hensman, just coming back on a comment that you just made. I just want to be for absolute clarity and just so members are absolutely clear, obviously, that we're here to consider the planning application before you in terms of which has got to be determined on the planning, material planning considerations. We're not here to consider anything in relation to licensing and so forth, so we need to be careful that we're not straying. I don't think we are, but we need to be. There's two separate forms of legislation here, and we're purely here this evening to determine the planning application, which comes down to the principle of the use, and some of the comments made would fall under a licensing remit. So I just wanted, for clarity, just to be clear on that point. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Well, members, it has been moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Ritchie that we refuse this application. If we had had the opportunity to consider it beforehand, this would be our decision. All those in favour of that decision? And that is unanimous. Thank you, members. And that brings us to application 5F, application 22-01527, full. Councillor Bowers is leaving us. Land east of High Street, Halstead, and this can be found on pages 243 to 282. And I do have 3 people wishing to make a statement on this application. The first person wishing to make a statement is Mrs. Eileen Penn. She is chair of the Halstead 21st Century Group.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members.
Yeah.
My name is Eileen Penn and I'm chair of the Halstead 21st Century Group. As you're all probably aware, we have been campaigning for nearly 10 years for the retention of the group of air raid shelters and for the whole site known as Land East of the High Street to be redesignated as a public open space. Whilst this is still the case, we fully appreciated that unlike other development sites in Halstead, Land East of the High Street has been allocated by Braintree District Council for comprehensive development for a number of years. The 15 underground shelters and 1 overground structure are in a state of disrepair, and we've discussed how to retain as much of these assets as possible and bring them into the public realm. The group's been in dialogue with Halstead New Homes for several months and have discussed an agreement in principle to secure the long leasehold of retained shelters and surrounding land. Halstead New Homes would provide a financial contribution for the refurbishment and reinstatement of the air raid shelters and also maintenance. This could create a unique opportunity for the town to create a heritage destination for the local community and beyond. Some ideas for usage include conversion of the overground structure into an information centre for the shelters, refurbishment of a shelter to show what it was like at the time of its use, and the fit out of other shelters as a blank canvas for possible accommodation, experience, events, exhibitions, etc. Community use would also very much be at the forefront. The surrounding landscaped external areas could be available for guided tours and information points, etc. The area would be secured at night to prevent antisocial behaviour and provide appropriate safeguarding. We would hope that the further investigation works proposed by the Moulton Partnership earlier this year would be concluded, possibly as a joint venture. Further to discussions with Halstead New Homes and agreement on main issues, we would be happy to contribute to finalise this with the applicant in a management plan for the air raid shelters. To this end, we consider that the best way forward would be to defer the application to allow a management plan to be produced and finalised. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Penn. The next speaker, and I am changing the order as requested by the speakers. The next person wishing to speak is Mr. Mark Harris, and he's speaking for the agent.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Mark Harris, and I'm speaking in support of the application before you. Last week, I was appointed by Halstead New Homes to advise on this proposal. Having carefully considered the application and recommendation, I believe the application should be deferred to allow the reasons for refusal to be the subject of further discussion before a decision is made. The reasons can all be easily overcome, in my view, and which Liam Boyd behind me will also explain. You will be aware of the site's policy context and challenges. Policy LLP 23 identifies how the site is very well located and has a series of constraints which have made development difficult to achieve. Development in and around town centres on sites such as this are exactly the sustainable locations that national and local policy encourages for development. Such sites are not without their challenges, and to deliver heritage and other benefits often requires sustained negotiation and submissions during the course of a planning application. This has not occurred on this planning application as yet, and it is important this proposal is treated fairly, consistent with other major schemes in your district, including those that we've heard about tonight, such as the Earlscombe Airfield and the National Grid developments. Liam Boyd will deal with the second reason for refusal related to design. I comment on the others as follows. Reason 1, heritage. The only outstanding issue is the submission of a management plan to demonstrate how the shelters will be maintained. Essex County Archaeology recommend this can be conditioned. This also sits within the recommended Section 106 heads of terms, and we agree this can be controlled in such a way. Importantly, any development can only start on site once this management plan has been approved. The shelters will therefore be protected and prioritised, and this allows us much greater time with this 21st century group and your officers on preparing such a plan. Reason 3, ecology. The only outstanding requirement is one final reptile survey. This survey was completed last week with no reptiles recorded and can be submitted immediately to remove this objection. Details of the landscape buffer were submitted with the application as figures 46 and 47 in the design and access statement. When both are reviewed, sufficient information has been submitted. Reason 4, affordable housing. The design access statement proposes at page 23 that it is the applicant's aspiration to provide 30% or 9 units for social housing. B3 requested from your officers details of the financial contributions arising from the Section 106, so the applicant confirm this offer or submit a financial viability assessment. The heads of terms are only provided once the committee report was published, so the applicant will now review and confirm their offer in the very near future. Reason 5 relates to Section 106. The applicant only had sight of the heads of terms when the committee report was published, so has had no time to agree or prepare an agreement. This can be undertaken with additional time. The applicant is committed to delivering this scheme and the new homes and heritage benefits it offers. This will address the constraints and challenges of the site, making important early delivery for the new local plan. With additional time, we are confident we can work in partnership with your officers to resolve the issues and avoid unnecessary refusal. We hope to then see this application returned to your committee with a recommendation for approval. I therefore respectfully recommend deferment of the application for a period to be agreed with your officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. The final person wishing to make a statement this evening is Mr. Boyd. He is speaking for the agent on the same application.
Thank you, Chair.
Could you switch the... That's lovely. No,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and members. Good evening. I'm going to discuss the reasons for refusal number 2, the design and appearance and impact on the character of the area. I'm going to run through this in line with the sections within the planning report. 11.2.5 refers to the comprehensive redevelopment of the site, which includes land to the northwest of the application site. We have considered this future expansion of the site illustrated in 4.2.4 of our design and access statement, which is part of our submitted documents. The site is dominated by TPOs, and there are only 5 small pockets of land that can actually be considered for development, and they have been illustrated in the design and access statement. The main sites that are capable of development are Site A, which is in the west of the site and can only be accessed via the High Street. The other is Site C, which is in the north of the site, and that can only be accessed from the centre. Neither are landlocked by our proposals. There is a large parcel of land in the centre, which is identified as Area B, but we do not believe that that is sufficient for any development to take place. 11.2.6, architectural space and amenity space comments can be resolved through discussion with the case officers without materially changing the scheme. Residential units 7 to 11 are with the gardens are 100 square metres. This is when the terrace has been included in the garden calculation, which was excluded from the officers' calculations. Residential unit 1 is slightly substandard, but with a minor adjustment to the boundary fence, this can become 100 square metres. The distance between units 5 and 6 and 12 and 13 are substandard by 1.6 metres. This can easily be achieved by moving each of these units 800 millimetres to the east and to the west, respectively. Apartments 24 and 26 are 13 metres from Vicarage Meadow, one Vicarage Meadow. We can change the proportions of the apartment to make this 15, which will make it compliant. Residential units 18 and 19. The rear ground windows look onto this is adjacent to the school, where the rear, first floor windows are fine by the officers because they're obscure glass, but we cannot understand why there's a problem with ground floor windows, which will be screened by a 2-metre fence and landscaping. Moving on to 11.2.7. This information was offered to BDC, but it was advised it could be submitted when other consultations were received from other parties. I'll skip a few bits out here because I'm running out of time, obviously.
You've run out of time, actually.
Well, I'll carry on if that's all right, Chair. One of the National Design Space Standards, residential units 5, 6, 12 and 13 are shown as oversized 3-bed, 5-person units, and they're identified as 3 5-bed persons on their schedule. Bedroom 3 can be reduced in size to make it compliant. Fine, very easily done.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring it to an end because you do get 3 minutes. I've let you exceed, and we do have a copy of your statement, so we know exactly what else you were going to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to the presentation which is going to be made by Mel. Good evening, Mel.
Good evening, members. Good evening, members. There's a couple of points I just wanted to come back on that were raised during the public question time. I don't know if you've all had the benefit of reading the written submissions that came that were sent round earlier today, but on the third bullet point in the comments submitted by Mr. Harris, there's reference to the heads of terms only being provided when the committee report was published. I wanted to confirm that actually the possible heads of terms, so it wasn't an exhaustive list, but we normally have a rough idea of what the heads of terms would be for an application. They were sent to the applicant back in June of this year, and there's a suggestion that if they had had them, they would have either confirmed that they were acceptable or that a financial viability assessment would be submitted. No, either agreement or viability assessment had been submitted to us. So I just wanted to clarify that point, that the agent was made aware of potential Section 106 heads of terms back in June. And there was another point which Mr. Boyd wasn't able to get to, but in his written statement on the second page, there's reference to the land between 6 and 7 Factory Lane Terrace. I think it's 11.2.11, and it states that that land belongs to the applicant and then will then be provided as a second access into the site. That piece of land actually doesn't sit within the red line of the application site, so it's not being considered as part of this application, and I just wanted to clarify that point. I will point that out when we get to that slide, but it was just a fact that I wanted to clarify for you before I started my presentation.
Thank you.
So, moving on. So the application before you this evening is for seeking full planning permission for 31 residential units with the associated car parking, amenity areas, external works with the retention of 10 of the air raid shelters and the warden's hut. Some members may well be aware of this site. It did come to committee a few years ago, but there are some new members on the committee, so I will put into context where we are in Housestead. So at the bottom left-hand corner here, what we can see is the car park that belongs to the large co-op supermarket. And then these two long buildings here are Factory Terrace, which are the three-storey buildings with the nice windows that you can see from that car park. Moving along, we've then got Vicarage Meadow. So we've got 8 houses here in a cul-de-sac. This is the centre of the site. You can see that you've got these sort of oblong sausage shapes. They are the air raid shelters. And then we've got the warden's hut here, or what is left of the warden's hut. Over to the right-hand side here, we have Simmons Court. We've also then got St Andrews Road, which is where the main vehicular access, or the only vehicular access, would come into the site. To the north, we have Congregation House, and then over to the left-hand side here, this is the corner of the centre and the road that wraps around that building, and then there's a surface car park at the back here. You can't see off here, just off the edge here, is the main high street, and then all the shops and buildings that run along the high street. So the next slide will put into context one of the constraints of the site, which is the number of trees and vegetation that runs along the site. So again, pointing out here, we can see we've got the car park here for the co-op. This is the centre up here. We've got Simmons Court over this side here, and this is St Andrews Road. So the next slide here just provides you with an overview of the constraints of the site. So the green dots are tree protection orders. The yellow line marks the conservation area. So the site straddles the conservation area here. And then, as you're all aware, the blue marks listed buildings. So fairly constrained site on all sides, but that just puts in context what we're dealing with the application site. So moving on to the proposed site plan. So as I mentioned, the main vehicular access is here to the right-hand side. So St Andrews Road would continue past Simmons Court, and then into the site. We have pairs of houses along the top, some detached houses in the centre here, and along this side elevation here. And then there's a terrace of 5 dwellings in the centre of the site, and then along where the site backs onto Factory Terrace and Vicarage Meadow, we have a number of flats in 2-storey form, but we've got, say, this one here is just 2 flats, and then we've got groups of 4 where the building footprint is slightly larger. On this plan also, you can see that these areas that are hashed or highlighted blue, which hopefully appear on your screen, they are the air raid shelters that will have to be removed to make way for the development of the site. And then we've got the ones either side of it which are proposed to then be retained. So the next few slides give you a flavour of the appearance of the buildings proposed across the site. So these are the 2 pairs, units 1 through to 4. And then we've got the semi-detached houses, or the linked detached houses in the centre of the site. This is the appearance of the terrace in the centre. So this is at one end at the front, and then at the back. We've then got the smaller detached properties, 14 through to 17, and then these give the next few slides give you a flavour of the flats that are proposed. in terms of floor plans and elevations. The next slides show you sections through, which, if any of you have attempted to carry out a site visit on here, there's a change in levels, and you do have to be careful where you tread, otherwise you might not get your footwear back. It is quite overgrown, but as these sections show, there is a change in levels across the site. So this is the terrace of 5 in the centre of the site, and just behind that you can see the 2 pairs. And then again another section through. So this is through from, so to this side here is Congregation House, and I'm just going to minimise that. And then this is running through the site down towards the flats, and just off of the slide, which you're not able to see, is where Factory Terrace is and the car park belonging to the co-op. Again, these are the 2 houses at the top end of the site. And then moving on to, I have got quite a lot of photographs because it can be seen from quite a lot of places, so please bear with me. Hopefully they'll make sense. The photographs I've taken, the initial photographs that you'll see are from outside the site, and then there are photographs inside the site. So this is a view of the site from the centre, and there's a small electricity substation at the end here. And then this is where one of the proposed pedestrian access points would be at this point here. Again, another photograph from the centre. Part of this, where these trees are, is the land that's within the comprehensive development area, but not within the application site. So you kind of have to look a little bit further beyond that in terms of where the application site is. There we go, a closer view of the substation and the access, which would be just to the left of it here. These photographs show Factory Terrace, again, so this photograph's taken from the car park, and the land sits behind that, so you can just make out some of the trees. And then some photographs further along there where we can see, this is number 1 and 2 Vicarage Meadow, and then you can just make out the backs of some of the other properties in the cul-de-sac of Vicarage Meadow, which is there. And then this is a view up Vicarage Meadow. So where these trees are at the end, these trees would all be removed to make way for the development. This photograph is taken from St Andrews. So Simmons Court is behind where I'm standing. So I'm looking south towards Factory Terrace. And again, all of these trees would be removed. This is looking in the opposite direction. So in the foreground here is Simmons Court. This is Congregation House behind. The vehicular access would sit here, and these trees would be removed to make way for the development. This is a direct view of the vehicular access that would lead into the site from St Andrews Road. Another view across the site from St Andrews, looking in the southwesterly direction. This is just looking back down St Andrews Road towards Parsonage Street, I think it is. So this shows you, I mean, this was taken during the middle of the day, so there is a fair number of on-street car parking restrictions already along this road. But this doesn't fall within the site where these trees are. This is the corner of the playing field that belongs to the school. So this is a longer view of the vehicular access, and the green arrow marks where that road would continue. This photograph is Congregation House, which you would have seen in the back of some of the previous photographs. And the site sits behind, and is this area of trees behind here. And then this photograph just puts it in a bit more detail. These are the trees behind, and so the application site sits behind Congregation House. This is a view of the site from the north. Last but not least, we have some photographs of the air raid shelters. So I don't know if any of you have been into the site, but they're quite well disguised now in terms of how overgrown the site is. and they take the form of these mounds, which I suspect probably in the winter are more obvious than they are during the summer, just because of the leaves falling off the trees. And then, as you might be able to hopefully make out from this photograph, each one has got a concrete access, which kind of runs round in at sort of ground level. Most of them are not safe to go inside, but the plucky heritage officer stuck his head in and took a photograph for you. So that's what one of them looks like. They have acquired a fair amount of rubbish within there, but that's what most of them either look like or would have looked like at some point in the past. And again, this top photograph here shows you the mound appearance of the air raid shelters. The last photographs here are of the warden's hut. So again, it's in a fairly poor state of repair, as you can see. And there is a, just down here, you can see where the ground is a bit darker. There is a water feature, I suppose, or there was a spring or something that runs through and into the building. So it was quite, a bit dicey walking across that bit of the site because it was a bit slippery. But as you can see, the building is in a fair poor state of repair with, undergrowth taking over. So just moving on to the summary of the application. It's a full planning application for 31 residential units. The site is allocated for comprehensive redevelopment within Househead Town Centre, but it is highly constrained as set out within the presentation, with protected trees, partly within a con area and also surrounded by listed buildings. Officers consider that it's a poor application submission with insufficient information regarding the retention, maintenance and management of the air raid shelters, and the proposals fail to provide a suitable layout for the site which considers the whole of the redevelopment of the whole site. Officers consider that there's poor amenity for both future and existing occupiers, and that there's an unacceptable design, lack of pedestrian links, insufficient ecology information and the lack of affordable housing. Officers have therefore concluded that the public benefits flowing from the development would not be outweighed by the harm indicated above and set out within your committee report, and therefore a recommendation is to refuse planning permission. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Mann.
A question. Were there any sort of pre-application discussions?
Yes, there was. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Mann, for the question. I'll come back on that point. So this was a point that I was hoping to be able to clarify for members. So there was reference within the agent's statement to engagement with officers. To clarify, there was a pre-application with the local planning authority that was submitted in July last year, and we responded in August same year. The pre-application was overwhelmingly negative based on the information that was submitted. And I wouldn't ordinarily do this, but just to read the summary of some of the issues that were raised. The impact upon the conservation area setting of the listed buildings is considered to be unacceptable. The layout of the proposal is not considered to be acceptable. The proposal would not provide an acceptable standard of amenity for future occupiers. Insufficient car parking would be provided for the proposal. The proposal would have an unacceptable impact upon existing trees, amongst other issues. So officers were very clear with the applicant well over a year ago in relation to this proposal. This is a very sensitive site, as Mel has outlined, with a number of constraints, and it's simply a poor level of engagement, I would suggest, from the applicant and the developer here, that for an application, for a major planning application, particularly one which involves this amount of constraints on a highly sensitive site in a town centre location, there needs to be more further engagement. So, to be absolutely clear, the local planning authority, the officer team, will always work with applicants to try to get to a positive position where we can support a proposal. But in this particular case, we've been very clear in our feedback with the applicant that the changes required to make this proposal acceptable would be so fundamental that effectively we'd be looking at a new application submission.
Thank you.
And we've been consistent on that front, Councillor Mann. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anything else you wish to add, Councillor Mann? That was it.
I was going to ask, was the gap between the applicants and the officers small enough to make deferment a possibility, a useful possibility, but my sense of reading the report was this was not the case, and I'm glad to have it confirmed.
Right, thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs. Beavers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Of course, I'm more than content to hear what other members have to say this evening, but based on knowing the site and the town incredibly well, and I am one of those people that have been in the site over many, many years, and really do appreciate the work and also the artwork by the community, which I've gone and watched over many years, which is super fabulous and really, you know, extends how the local people feel about this site. And actually, for all the extra comments just made by our officer, Chris Padgey, I think it's all there. And I'm happy to recommend officers' recommendations to refuse this, Madam Chairman. You know, it's within such a special area. You know, the woodland, the trees, the TPOs on the trees, the Grade 2 listed buildings, the congregation house, that whole setting, and also, you know, in my opinion, the general lack of understanding and interpretation, and, you know, it could be so much more than is currently on offer this evening, and I just feel that a lot more needs to be done to convince me that something of this scale, which I still consider to be overdevelopment of the site, mindful of the complete landscape. As I say, on those grounds, I'm happy to recommend officers' refusal. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
You are moving officers' recommendation.
I am, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Does it find a seconder? Councillor Abbott, and you wish to speak? Sorry, I'd have already got Councillor Abbott down. Well, as you've seconded it, are you? Well, okay, fine. Councillor Monday.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the confusion there. I wasn't trying to second the application. In fact, I was mindful this evening to try and defer this application, but it seems the comments from Chris Padgey is that this application is too far away from being correctable in its current state, even though you know, I've heard 3 speakers this evening that show a very much a willingness to enter into dialogue, produce the missing paperwork, etc., and reconfigure the site amenity layout design, address ecology. You know, I sense that you know, the House of 21st Century Group has spent many months in discussion with the developer to try and get this site to come somewhat be more acceptable to the town as a whole. I would say that of the 15 shelters, they are in a state of disrepair, and that's only going to become worse as time goes on. The site has had a history of applications that have failed. I think it's important for the town to do something with this site because it is allocated in the adopted local plan. I would hope that this could come forward then with a new application, that there would be a much better dialogue between the developer, the architects, with House of 21st Century's help, and as well as Town Council to address the issues, because I do believe that we do need to do something with this site to stop these air raid shelters from becoming so irreparable that nobody would want to develop the site in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Monday. You do I mean, we have to look at the application before. It's not come with everybody's recommendations how they're going to change it on the night. It's just too late. I've got go back to Councillor Abbott now.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree with what Councillor Mann said. Very interesting listening to the speakers. Is there room for deferral? But I think it's very clear from officers that that would be a bridge too far because of all the problems with it. The thing that strikes me, and I was interested that officers said this had come up in the pre-app conclusions, that there was an unacceptable impact on trees. And I was a little bit concerned when the officer said the site's overgrown. We've got to stop cutting down trees. I've said this meeting after meeting after meeting. it's so easy for these sites to be lost, and with modern machinery and chainsaws and diggers, sites like this can go in a couple of days. I've seen it. It's heartbreaking. It's the point Councillor Beavis made. Establishing new planting is getting increasingly difficult. You've only got to look at the development sites in the area I represent to see they're struggling, and those are some of them have been watered. You know, we're going to get a run of summers like what we've had this year, with temperatures up to 40 degrees centigrade and no rain for weeks and weeks on end. So we need to be protecting far more the trees we've got. Now, I appreciate this site has been allocated, so at some point there's likely to be some form of development. I accept that, but this application in particular for me just strikes a dagger in the heart in terms of the catastrophic loss of those trees. And I'm just wondering why that isn't in the reasons for refusal when it was one of the conclusions of the pre-app. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to agree with the comments from Councillor Monday. When taking into account the 21st century, I think it's really important to maintain the historical interest of the air raid shelters and all that means, not only to the people of Halstead, but actually from an architectural value and history value as well. I too was effectively minded to try and defer it, but having heard from our officers that the two sides are too far apart, I do hope also that going forward that there will be another application come forward that will address the sensitivity and all of these issues that are being raised tonight, and it will come to a conclusion that will not only benefit the developer but the residents as well, and especially the historic value and interest from the people of Halstead in the air raid shelters.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you. Well, I mean, as has been said already, this area has been allocated in our up-to-date local plan as an area for redevelopment. That will mean cutting down some trees if this area is to be redeveloped. I've read in detail the design and access statement, because often I find that's quite a helpful document for sort of collating everything all together. My understanding is that, could I just ask of the officers this? I think it states in the design access report, there's the negotiations that have gone on. My understanding is there has been quite a lot of renegotiation of the design to address some of the officers' concerns, and therefore what is presented to us tonight is not actually what was originally put forward. Is that my understanding correct? And could I then come back with some other points, Councillor?
So, Councillor Parker, I think that's fair that the proposals have moved on, but I think the point to highlight from our perspective as officers is that this is a large application, it's a major application, and design and layout in particular is an important point that requires a lot of engagement, and unfortunately that willingness to engage seems to have only existed once the application has been submitted, rather than coming back appropriately at the pre-application and seeking further engagement to get the design and layout and the details of the proposal more acceptable before the application was submitted. But it's a fair comment, and it's a correct comment that I don't think we're looking at a carbon copy of what we consider at the pre-application stage. Thank you, Councillor Parker.
It is actually obviously a very important site for Halstead, and this is it's a difficult site to develop because of all the various constraints and the topography and so on. And it's also been a pretty complicated application, lots of different aspects to consider. But I do have some sympathy actually for the applicant with whether or not some of the reasons for refusal could be addressed. Certainly, when I read the design and access statement, there was a reference in there to offering some of the houses 9 units for affordable housing. So that is something, and the applicant has confirmed that is something that could be pursued and considered, and so that could address that reason. So the reptile survey has been completed already. I think that, from memory, I think that was the only real issue on ecology. The issue about the rest of the site being landlocked if this goes ahead. I think, from my understanding, is that the rest of the site does have a lot of TPOs on it. It would be quite nice if it was all dealt with together as one, but whether that actual rest of the site would actually be possible to develop that at all is probably open to question. Obviously the issue of the air raid shelters, there's a potential route forward involving Halstead 21st Century Group, which really leaves the design and the layout. And I do understand there are some concerns about back-to-back distances, overlooking, size of bedrooms and so on. But I think with further discussion, I do feel that those could potentially possibly be resolved. I mean, one of the things that sort of struck me as I looked through the plans is that because we're requiring tree-lined streets on two sides, that trees to be planted on both sides of that street, that is effectively reducing the garden sizes. Maybe, one thing that could be explored is to have the garden size, trees on one side rather than another, and I just feel that rather than rejecting the whole application, would it not be possible to defer it and see if these differences can be ironed out, because the site has been waiting around for a long time for development, and it is a site that is allocated for development. So that was my feelings. Your comments on that.
So you are quite free, if you want to defer it, to move deferment and see if you get the agreement of the other members of the council. But, I mean, that's one way forward.
Well,
We have a motion to refuse.
I'm just explaining to Councillor Parker that if she feels that way, it's one way she could do it. But we do have a motion on the table at the moment, so Councillor Hensman.
Can I ask a typical silly question like I always do, but I then learn from it, in that if this site is so constrained and we want to give TPOs teeth, that we don't get them chopped down, I appreciate that you don't, you allocate a site, but with such constraints, I can't see how it can be allocated, if you know what I mean, because how do you fit things round what's in the constraints? And that's not for the local plan to say this is how you're going to do it. The local plan will simply say here are your constraints, fit round them. So I feel from the presentation that this site shouldn't have been allocated, really. And there's such, having been to Halstead over my civic year many times, I get the appetite that Halstead does look after its own town, and I don't know why the history group and the town council and so on couldn't take this and created another park and entered that and got themselves another gold award to add to the rest of the town. But that's obviously not what's before us, and therefore I can't support it in the sense of I can't see how you can fit anything in with such so many constraints. But I'd appreciate any learning opportunities, Chris, please, thank you.
We've had some very different applications on this site over the years. Over my past 20 years on this council, I've seen supermarkets and goodness knows what proposed for it. So it has changed many, many times. Did you wish to add anything before I continue?
I was just going to come back to Councillor Hensman. So, I mean, we can't change the fact that we've got a recently adopted local plan. It does allocate the site. So the planning status of the site is set out within the local plan. There is a scheme here that can be worked around the constraints, but it is a difficult scheme to arrive at, to balance, because of the nature of the competing demands on this site. So this is where we say, as officers, this is a really tricky, sensitive site that really requires careful consideration. And we're not talking about a cleared site here where there's no constraints or parameters. You've got existing development, you've got neighbouring relationships, you've got trees, you've got the heritage issue, you've got changing land levels, you've got the need to provide acceptable levels of amenity for future occupiers without affecting existing residents. You've got to provide car parking and access. You need to create those linkages across the site, and this is where you know, from a design master planning approach, that site, it is a really difficult site. Often these are the most tricky sites to approach from a planning perspective. That there is a scheme there to be found. From officers' perspective, quite clearly, we don't feel the one before you this evening is that, and more work needs to be done to be able to bring something acceptable forward that takes account of all of those. And there will be a balance to be struck because, as referenced, with the sites allocated, so that will immediately put pressure and there will be a loss of some of those trees. And there will be other implications as well. But at the moment, the balance is, from officers' perspective, is very firmly against the proposal based on the heritage, and then secondly in relation to the design, the second reason for refusal, and then the other reasons effectively are added on, which may well be resolved at a future date. But hopefully those comments, Councillor Hensman, are helpful.
Well, councillors, it has been moved by Councillor Beavers and seconded by Councillor Abbott that we refuse this application. I'm going to put that to the vote at the moment.
Sorry, I did ask officers, can we add another reason for refusal about the quantum loss of trees? Is that possible or not?
So, Councillor Abbott, so apologies we didn't come back on that. So we did just have a brief exchange. I think, so while it's obviously members' prerogative to amend the reason for refusal, I think our recommendation, based on the design and layout, that's a strong element. That we've got to be, I suppose, slightly careful in the sense that the site's allocated, there will be some pressure on trees in terms of removal. So we are, I think a slight concern is, given the assessment and the recommendation that's set out in the report, there is an acknowledgement from our side as officers that there would be some tree loss. So I think we may have some difficulty. It may actually blur the lines with the second reason for refusal. But it's members' decision, obviously, this evening in terms of whether or not that was incorporated or not. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chairman, could we make an amendment to that recommendation, please, that it's the amount of loss of trees?
You want to add that as,
yes,
as a reason for refusal?
Yeah.
So I will put that to the vote first. Refusal with the additional condition, reason for refusal is for the loss of trees. So I'm putting the amount of the loss of trees. I'm putting that to the vote first, is whether we add a new reason for refusal. All those in favour of that wording?
Madam Chairman,
Those against?
I think it would be best if the motion is, as Mrs. Beavers has just put it, that is the motion to refuse on that basis.
No, she wants
refusal with that additional reason.
Correct, Madam Chairman. It's the recommendation with that as an addition. That is the recommendation.
Yes, but that's what I'm putting to the vote.
Sorry, I thought you were putting the additional reason.
No, I'm putting to the vote. So the reason for this application is going to be, we're recommending refusal, but to add an additional reason for refusal. That's what I'm putting to the vote at the moment.
You.
So those in favour of that additional refusal thing, that's two of you. Those against that. So that reason for additional reason for refusal has fallen. Now, the other members do not want to put an additional refusal reason. They don't agree with you. That's where we're getting to.
I'm telling you, as a point of procedure, doesn't the further reason form part of the substantive motion? It's not separate. I think that's what the officer was suggesting, or have I got that wrong?
Where do we start? We start with I'll put the original motion then first, without your additional, which was for refusal. All those in favour of refusal without any additional reasons? Those against refusal? Abstentions? That application has been refused. Now, do you want me to put to vote if the members will want to no, if they want their addition?
Can do it this way.
No, I mean, all I could do, Madam Chairman, is to ask the officer to put in. Well, you can't. You can't put in a condition because it's been refused.
The other members did not want that additional condition. That's where I was getting to. Right. Thank you very much, Mel, for your We now come to the final application, and as you probably realise, this application is only coming to us because the architect is related to a member of this council, and Chris is going to make the presentation, aren't you? No? Mel. Sorry, Mel.
I can do it in a deeper voice.
Sorry.
So, the last application of the evening is a householder application for the construction of a three-bay cart lodge garage at Crows Farm, North Road, Welsham Water. So, as set out within the officer report, the barn has got planning permission and is currently being converted for residential purposes. This is the grey building inside the red site location plan. The next slide shows you in a bit more detail. So this is the barn that's currently being converted. And then the next slide shows the position of the garage building, just to the right-hand side. The next few slides show you in detail the floor plan and the roof plan and the elevations of the building. This is a street scene looking at the eastern elevation. So we've got the main residential building here, and then the garage at one end. And then this is a view from the south. So again, the main residential building. And although the previous street scene appeared to show that the buildings were linked, you can actually see that there is a gap here, and so the garage is separated. These photographs here show the conversion underway, and the proposed siting of the garage, helpfully, would be behind where these two vans are parked. So at the rear portion of the site, but behind roughly where the transit van is. Again, this is a photograph taken within the site, and again, the position of the garage would be in this location here. So, in conclusion, the proposed garage building is of an appropriate size, scale and design and would be in keeping with the character and appearance of the existing property and locality. No detrimental impact would occur to neighbouring residential amenity or highway matters. Officers conclude that the garage building would be acceptable and recommend that planning permission be granted. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Mel. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
So this application is in my ward, and I know this barn very well indeed, and I'm quite pleased to see that it is now an application to, well, the barn itself is going to be for a single dwelling, because it was originally going to be proposed to be a terrace of 3, which probably would have been awful, but that was under permitted development rights. Anyway, this application is concerned with the garage building. I completely agree with the officer. It's completely appropriate for, in terms of the design and the scale in this location, and I'm happy to remove the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Does it find a second, or it does in several places? Does anyone wish to add anything further on you? No? Well, I will. It has been. I have to take one of you as being the second. I'll take Mrs. I think Mrs. Spray. So it has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Parker, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Spray, that we grant this. All those in favour? Thank you, members. Members, anyone? Everybody, that's unanimous. And that brings us to the planning part of our meeting. I do have one other item. Sorry, Councillor Mundy.
Sorry, Chair, for the interruption. I didn't declare an MPI because I do actually know ex-Councillor Penn, who was one of the speakers. I think for transparency, I ought to declare that.
Okay, apologies. Thank you. That's all right. Next Tuesday night, it's being planned, if you're all in favour, of having a briefing on our housing number situation, as this would be for the planning committee. Chris, did you want to say anything about it?
No, really just an opportunity for officers just to explain the position again, set out the calculation, the challenges ahead and so forth. So we thought potentially before further applications come before this committee, just to again set out the position, give a refresher, given the recent change in the position. So if members find that helpful, we can host something next week. Cathy Carpenter from our policy team would be leading, supported by Emma and myself. We were proposing to we'd be able to use the committee room area here, but we can host as a hybrid meeting as well. So any members that wouldn't be able to attend in person or didn't want to attend in person would be able to attend virtually, if that would be preferable.
I think also we need to invite the substitutes, and because they need to be updated as well. I mean, it would be it's foolish just for the planning committee without the substitutes. So can I just take a show of hands of those that think it's a good idea and would be willing to attend before we go any further? Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah.
It's hybrid, but can we just clarify whether there's a clash? There is a member development group meeting that was announced today.
Oh, that's not member development.
It's not member development meeting, it's the meeting that's assigned to the member development. So it's only just come up on.
I do feel perhaps this is a bit more important, and the fact that it can be done by hybrid.
There are 2 or 3 of us on both.
On both.
What time's your meeting?
6 o'clock. 6 to 7.
Oh, well, if it's 6 till 7 and we start at 7:15, you've got time for a cup of tea. Right, members. I think I get Alison to get something out tomorrow so that the substitutes know, and those 2 the members that were not here this evening, the 3 members. And if it could be hybrid, it might be very helpful, because I'm going to be rushing that day and I don't know if I'll get here. So I'll close the meeting at 9:53